I'm always impressed when I have an emotional experience watching a film, but also a physical one. I literally felt at times like this suffocation like coming over me while watching. I just
that's
felt
interesting.
like just taking in this suffocation of the plight of these women. And speaking of your character, Carol, I also felt this overwhelming sense of sadness, this loneliness of her. How did you see her?
She's someone who's very isolated. You know, she's been around the block once or twice and been burnt and knows how the world works. And then she encounters and is quite bewildered by this attraction she has to a younger woman who's quite cult-like, played by Rooney, exquisitely played by Rooney, who doesn't have that sense of heartbreak that Carol has experienced. But I think the isolation is a very big thing, because a lot of this volcanic feeling that they have for one another is processed away from one another. And also it's very easy to forget that the language with which we all talk about relationships now, none of that existed. And the psychologizing that we have around our heterosexual relationships, let alone same-sex relationships, there's no words that women would have to describe their feelings for another woman, because it was an aberration and it was a criminal act.
Oh gosh, yeah, it's so hard even hearing that. And I found even watching this movie that I had to look at myself, because I never considered the plight of women in the 1950s and what they dealt with. And considering that, how do you feel like this film, even though it took place in the 1950s, is a timeless film and even an important film for today?
I think it's a beautiful love story, and I think it could only be made in this way by Todd now, because the language around same-sex relationships has shifted to the point where the love story can sit central to the film. It's not a political film, but it could be seen as through a political prism, but perhaps 15 years ago. That the language, thank God, the conversation, thank God, in most countries, in many countries around the world has moved on. The very fact that these relationships are being portrayed on screen. You know, there have been, of course, in the past on film, but the Patricia Highsmith's story, The Price of Salt, which was then called Carol, was revolutionary at the time, because it was the first female or gay relationship that had been described in literature where one of the participants in the relationship hadn't killed themselves or been redeemed by the love of a good man or a good woman. So it was quite revolutionary.
Well, I love the fact that the use of the environment. I love the set designs, the cigarettes, the wardrobe, the makeup. How did you appreciate that when you were going about creating your character or just being on set?
It's a collaboration, and working with Morag Ross and Sandy Powell and Kay Giorgio did hair and makeup and costumes. I mean, we'd worked together a lot. We actually worked on Cinderella together, and we would sneak off, you know, behind the trailers, and because Carol was made on a wing and a prayer, and have, you know, and try and discuss what we were all going to do. And I love that. It's a dialogue. You know, this doesn't happen with one person. It's a team effort. And Todd is such a great girlfriend to have in that conversation. He's so visual and so collaborative. You know, he's wonderful.
Made in